just before we get going, because you said this to me in the commercial, that we're seeing the Prime Minister. He's speaking at a question and answer session at the United Nations on the Commission on the Status of Women. I did see some wide shots, and there did seem to be a very large crowd there. Every seat seems to be almost filled. It seems to be a full house. Maybe we have that shot. Can we show that now? And what do you make of that the Prime Minister is there speaking at the Commission on the Status of Women? Have we ever seen that?
I haven't seen it. The Commission on the Status of Women meets for 2 weeks in March each year, coincident with International Women's Day, and it's quite unusual for a Prime Minister to attend. It's unusual for television cameras to be there. The audience isn't unusual. You can graft an audience on pretty easily in the Commission, but this was a highly unusual circumstance, no question.
And we're certainly seeing that people seem to be very happy to see him there.
Undoubtedly.
Does this make him a very different Prime Minister, and this is a live shot, by the way, does this make him a very different Prime Minister from ones that we've seen in the past when it comes to women's issues at a global level?
Well, I don't know how invidious you want me to be. Certainly he's different from his predecessor in Canada. There have been other Prime Ministers or Presidents from other countries who have appeared, but this, I suspect, is a first for Canada.
So let's now talk about Canada bidding for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council for the year 2021-2022. What do you make of that?
I think it's an excellent decision. I have no doubt in my mind, Andrew, that Canada will be elected to the Security Council. I think I can predict that in advance. The mere fact...
No matter what happens, sorry to interrupt you, but no matter, because we could have a new government by then.
Yes, that's true. But the mere fact that we have signaled that we're going to re-enter multilateralism, that we're going to take the United Nations seriously, there is already a ripple effect. I'm in and out of New York constantly. As a matter of fact, I'm going to the UN this afternoon later. And there is a feeling that Canada's re-emergence is a very positive and useful thing. And one senses that that is likely to propel us into a Security Council seat again.
There was also the unusual moment where the Prime Minister was speaking in the foyer of the United Nations. What do you make of that? Is that just optics, or is there some significance to that?
Well, I think there was also a gathering at the Canadian Mission earlier this week with a number of cabinet ministers. I think it's an effort, carefully orchestrated, to show that Canada is engaging again with the UN. It will take more than that. It will take pursuing specific issues as well in order to give us the legitimacy and the imprimatur to win a council seat.
Where do you think the United Nations is in terms of its effectiveness as a world body today? Because there were some conservatives under Stephen Harper that said that the UN is not an effective body in many ways.
The UN feels paralyzed in the eyes of the world in the operation of the Security Council and the way in which it cannot solve issues like Syria. But one has to remember that the United Nations has a number of funds and programs like UNICEF and the World Food Program and the Program on Population Activities, all of these funds and programs which do magnificent work on the ground. And that's where the strength of the UN lies. And the difficulty at the Security Council should not prejudice our view of the UN. And that's where Canada comes in. If we promote climate change and responses to climate change, if we deal with gender equality, if we say that the next Secretary General of the UN should be a woman to succeed, forgive me, the lamentable tenure of Ban Ki-moon, if we say that we're going to rejoin peacekeeping forces, if we engage in the issues that the Security Council is engaged in. You know, the last 2 days of last week, Andrew, the Security Council was obsessed with peacekeepers who commit sexual violence in the peacekeeping operations, and horrendous thought. I'm involved with a group that pursues something called the Code Blue campaign to eliminate sexual violence committed by peacekeepers. Those are the kinds of issues, as Canada re-enters the United Nations orbit, that were we to pursue, we would gain the legitimacy.
Now, the Prime Minister mentioned Canada's important role in the Middle East with its humanitarian assistance as one of the reasons for the bid, but many are, as you know, are critical of Canada's multi-billion-dollar, $15 billion deal with Saudi Arabia, a country that's known for its human rights abuses. And Stephen Lewis, I'll get you to respond to this in just a moment, but let's just listen. The reporter was asking a question, and it went along the lines of the Netherlands has said, we will not sell arms to Saudi Arabia because of its human rights abuses. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say in response.
In regards to contracts already signed, it is a fairly important principle that a change of government in Ottawa doesn't lead to the cancellation of contracts previously signed by our government and with the support of our government. So the decisions taken in the past, we will not overturn. But moving forward, we are committed to the kind of openness, transparency, and rigor that, quite frankly, Canadians voted for in the last election.
So, Stephen Lewis, how do you square that? You know, concern about human rights, concern about gender equity, certainly gender issues in a country like Saudi Arabia where there are human rights abuses, and saying, well, this was a contract that was signed and we're stuck with it.
You cannot square it. What you heard from the Prime Minister was a disingenuous rationalization. There is no way that you can justify the sale of those arms to Saudi Arabia when you know full well that down the road they may well be used on the citizens of Saudi Arabia, indeed the citizens of Yemen, where Saudi Arabia is engaged in a notorious conflict. And one doesn't do that with a country whose human rights record lies virtually at the bottom of the scale of human rights atrocities. I mean, you can't talk about transparency and openness. I actually don't understand it. We have reversed contracts all the time. Contracts are not sacrosanct. We haven't even begun the process of manufacture and export. So it would be easy for this government to say, we're taking a stand on a huge human rights issue. They choose not to do so, probably because it creates jobs. I understand that. So you find alternative jobs, but you don't deal with Saudi Arabia on weaponry.
So why do you think that the government is making, you know, on the one hand, we hear the Prime Minister speak out about human rights and gender equality, and on the other hand, this contract is a go. So what do you think is happening? Is it about the 3,000 jobs
I assume
in
it's
London,
about
Ontario?
I assume it's the 3,000 jobs in London and southwestern Ontario, and that is a factor. But if you feel strongly about that, then you make a particular effort, perhaps around infrastructure expenditure in the budget that's coming, to focus on southwestern Ontario and give them the jobs that would be lost. But you don't become an arms supplier to a country whose human rights record is one of the most dismal in the world. It's an astonishing and inexplicable scar on the reputation of a young government.
Stephen Lewis, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure.